Are you tired of undermining your beliefs with clumsy arguments? Well, have I got the solution for you? Do you ever sit around and grade papers, or listen to the news, or visit social media, or consume content of just about any kind and find yourself wondering how the arguments that people make got so bad? It's okay, no judgment here. I do it all the time too, so I know how you feel. We're surrounded by so many ham-handed, butter-fingered, all-thumbs arguments that we might even find ourselves making them sometimes. But just because everyone else is doing it, that doesn't mean that we need to sink to the same sad level. In fact, recognizing what's wrong with the bad arguments that surround us can put us in a position to make even more effective arguments on our own. And who knows, maybe even help the people around us to level up a little. And all it takes is a dash of nuance. I'll confess that whenever I hear academics use the word nuance, I tend to roll my eyes. I think they use it in the sense of, hey, instead of writing an argument that will affect real people and have implications for their lives, why don't you write about something so aggressively esoteric that only 6 people will actually care and even fewer will probably read it? But as always, there's a sweet spot in the middle of everything. So instead of thinking about nuance as a tool to, write a 30-page paper about the origins of the sh sound in modern English, we can use nuance as a tool to write arguments that might actually make a difference. And in order to get a sense of what I mean, here are 3 statements that make an argument that's way too broad to be very useful. These are all little rhetorical bits that show up in papers all the time. But if any of these were to be pasted in as the thesis of an argument, you'd be sure to end up with a pretty weak and uninteresting one. Really, they all need some nuanced adjustment. So when we say nuance, we mean that each of these arguments could benefit from being narrower, more careful, more strategic. So I'll show you what that means and also how making more nuanced arguments will set you up for more persuasive success. So let's see if we can't take that first overly broad argument and spruce it up with a little nuance. We must protect the freedom of speech. This might seem like a pressing and relevant argument to make. People are always talking about the freedom of speech and its implications for everyday life. But can you see how this argument, as written, isn't really connected to reality in any kind of substantive way? This statement is really more of an opinion about a political idea than an argument about reality. When we say we, who do we really mean? And of course, the freedom of speech is a concept, and a huge and complex one at that. So what does it really mean in the context of this paper? More than that, though, this statement seems to exist in a sort of alternate reality, one where there are really only 2 groups of people. Those who think that the freedom of speech is important and who want to protect it, and those who think that the freedom of speech is bad and it ought to be eliminated. But this argument doesn't really need to be made because it's not addressing a real issue. Sure, there might be some people out there in the world who really do want to eliminate free speech, but in practical reality, just about anyone who will come across this argument will support the freedom of speech, at least to some degree. This broad, sweeping argument short-circuits itself by addressing a problem that doesn't really exist and advocating for a position that just about everyone would already agree with. Sure, somebody could say in good faith that freedom of speech is under attack, but the stakes aren't really as high as either having it or not. So a little nuance can help us to improve this argument and get it a little closer to reality. For example, if we worked with an argument like this, the speech code at the University of Boguslandia unfairly curtails the freedom of speech of its students and should be revised to include protections for making fun of the university president on homecoming weekend. Now, obviously, this is a fictional example, but even then, can you see how this argument would have more to do with reality than the broad example we started with? This argument is focused on an actual place, and it addresses an actual problem. Not only that, it proposes an actual solution. All of these changes are a result of making a more thoughtful and nuanced argument. We're no longer dealing with an imaginary binary of people who are either for free speech or against it. Instead, we're dealing with an actual policy and trying to figure out a way forward. In that sense, this second argument is no longer about conceptual ideas, it's about practical reality. Not only does nuance help us to ground our arguments in reality, but it also helps us to make sure that we aren't missing the real point. It's common for people to make arguments about things that they really care about and then address people that they think disagree with them. However, they tend to make those arguments in ways that show that they don't really understand what's at the root of that disagreement. Take our second example. Climate change is real and a threat to our existence. Like with the first example, this argument isn't really doing anything productive. and that's because it's missing what seems to be the real point of disagreement. Now, I know we have the phrase climate denier flying around all over the place out there, but I get the sense that the real disagreement isn't actually about whether or not the climate is changing, but about how we respond to well-documented and generally agreed upon changes. Yes, there are and always will be people who deny the existence of climates and assert that planets are flat and so on and so forth, but this argument without nuance misses the point and turns a good faith debate about what to do into a bad faith argument about why people are dum-dums. It's an argument that wastes time and effort because it thinks it needs to convince people that average temperatures are increasing when it really needs to focus its attention on coordinating a response to those increases in temperature that, again, most people already acknowledge. So consider this change. While there are many things that could be done to mitigate the effects of global climate change, the single most effective measure would be to support new legislation that will put an end to Kaputko International's practice of releasing hundreds of kilotons of sulfur hexafluoride into the air every hour. This more nuanced argument no longer misses the actual debate. Instead of pretending that everyone is arguing about whether or not temperatures are rising at all, it acknowledges that most people are on board with that, and that the real disagreement revolves around how to respond. There might be some people who argue that the best response would be to take the bus to work, or to stop using straws, or to create a hatch in the exosphere that we can just open to let all the greenhouse gases out. By focusing the argument and making it more nuanced, this imaginary writer has chosen to dive into the fray of competing proposals and offer one of their own that might actually make a difference. And that sort of thing can really only happen when you recognize the true roots of disagreement and deal with them in thoughtful and nuanced ways. And the third aspect of the benefits of a nuanced argument is that it tends to be more practically useful, unlike our third example. Here we have another ham-handed and overly general argument. But the real issue here, as with the others, is that a person who reads this argument will, at best, say that they agree and then do nothing. It just isn't apparent who the audience for this argument is. Hopefully school administrators, but we can't really say. It isn't clear what should be done, just something, and it isn't very careful about what aspects of mental health should be addressed. So without any additional refinement, this statement just expresses a broad opinion, and it does it so broadly that it's hard to even know what the problem it's addressing even is. So once more, let's try something more nuanced. Grades cause students a lot of anxiety, especially at the end of a semester. As a result, the University of Boguslandia could help to improve students' mental well-being by eliminating grades altogether. Now, there's always room for more refinement, and a nuanced argument could still be debated, but do you see the difference in how an audience could respond to this one? This argument doesn't just ask its audience to agree with an opinion. It asks them to do something. It's practical and doable in a way that a broader argument could never be. Because nuance gets us closer to reality and involves us in actual debates, it becomes much more applicable to actual practice. We're no longer working in the realm of opinions and ideas, we're working in the realm of problems and solutions. And for that reason, even though it might not seem as lofty or impressive, a nuanced argument is actually a much more persuasive and useful one. Of course, we'll still see people screaming useless opinions into the void, but we'll know better. If our less generous selves prevail, we'll recognize the power in our nuance and continue to make more persuasive arguments than those hopeless screamers. Or if our better selves prevail, we might help those people to improve their rhetorical efforts so that good things can actually get done. In fact, if you wanted to refer them to this video, I wouldn't put up too much of a fight. Either way, I'm always grateful that you've decided to share some of your time with me. Especially if you've stuck around to this point, I'll assume it's because you found this helpful. Let me know what you think and ask any questions you might have. That is, after all, why we're doing this thing. Now go out there and put together some useful and nuanced arguments, and we'll meet back here in a week.